In order to learn, one must make a mistake. Always have a backup. This happened over a decade ago now. I would have been 15 or so at the time. I was in my sophomore year of high school, and this all takes place in my general science class for the year. Things started off quite well in that class, with a nice teacher who was passionate about her topic. Unfortunately, for one reason or another, a good 6 weeks later, classes were shuffled and we ended up with a new teacher. Our new teacher was an older guy, certainly less passionate and kind of dull, but otherwise harmless. To provide a little background, I was certainly a troubled student in high school, and troubled is putting it lightly. I was a great student providing the teacher wasn't disrespectful and was actually interested in what they were teaching. There was nothing worse for me than a grumpy, bored, and disrespectful teacher. Now, this second gentleman was certainly bored and maybe a tad grumpy sometimes, but I wouldn't say he was necessarily disrespectful. He wasn't a good teacher, but he wasn't a terrible one either. He didn't ignite my passion for the subject by any means, but he was adequate. Then, for a second time that year, things got shuffled around on us and we were on our third teacher. This time, a brand new teacher at our school, a recent immigrant from the UK. We'll call her Miss Snow. She was middle-aged with reddish hair and a scowl so cold that she could extinguish the sun. That's a pretty cold-ass scowl. Miss Snow got into a routine. She made it very clear she would tolerate no misbehavior of any form, and include within the category of misbehavior was interruption. And this meant any kind. I observed several students, even well-behaved attentive ones, sent directly to the dean's office, a dean being someone who was essentially in charge of your year group, with no warning or prior offense of having the sheer gall to sneeze while she spoke. And it didn't matter how much you tried to cover it up. A friend of mine was unwell one day, but doing his best to make it through his classes. Unfortunately for him, he had quite a dry cough. "And hell hath no fury like Mrs. Snow." Poor bastard was jettisoned before the class even had a chance to be seated. And of course, it should go without saying that I was not on her good books. She was rude, unreasonably hostile, and clearly bored to tears by her subject. I don't recall how many lessons I saw to completion, but I certainly became intimately familiar with the dean's office that year. My favorite story to tell are the days when she was in a bad mood, as if she wasn't horrible enough already. Helicopter just flew over my house. I remember more than once she kicked out the entire class. God knows what she spent the rest of the lesson doing, but I remember the poor receptionist in the dean's office. Her eyes practically bulged right out of her head as she saw a Congo line of 30-something students making their way to the office, all requiring to be written up by her and seen by the year's dean. I can't imagine she was too fond of Mrs. Snow either. But the dean came to a wonderfully well thought out conclusion that the students were clearly the problem, not the teacher. Now, one day during class, I was seated near the front of the class, right next to the computer Miss Snow was using to deliver her wonderfully monotone lecture on God only knows what bollocks. I happened to notice a small red pen drive sticking out of the front of the machine. While she wasn't looking and most of the class was distracted, I bent down pretending to grab something from my backpack, which was on the floor below my stool, but quietly reached over and pulled the drive from the computer and stuffed it in my backpack before anyone else could notice. I don't know why I did it, just being a dick I guess, and I figured it's just a pen drive, she can get a new one. Later that day, I plugged the drive into the PCs in our library to browse the contents. Various things related to her class were scattered throughout, but then something in particular caught my eye: her immigration documents. I took a short peek and discovered her visa was due to expire in only a couple months, and that she had a new folder in which she was assembling her documentation for her next application. Oh shit, I thought. This flash drive was hot property. If she found out I had this, I would be in serious trouble. The obvious solution of quietly returning the drive never occurred to me. At first, I removed the red sleeve from the drive, hoping it would be unrecognizable. Even then, I was still nervous, so between classes one day, I threw it on the roof of one of the buildings, and not a moment too soon. She'd found out, and someone had dobbed me in. I don't think I'd ever been sent to the dean's that fast in my entire school life. I was grilled, kind of like CIA, FBI interrogations you see on TV, I didn't crack, denied all knowledge and responsibility. They conducted a search on my backpack and found nothing, just as well as I'd tossed it. I was incredibly well known to the dean at the point, and I could tell she was more than ready to believe I'd done it. But she couldn't prove it. Nobody could prove it. It was all he said, she said, so I was let go. I continued having classes with Mrs. Snow. She was incredibly hostile towards the entire class after that, but especially me. More than once during this time, I got sent to the deans for absolutely no reason whatsoever. The referral slip she sent me with was always claimed some utter bullshit that never happened, and the deans would gobble that shit up eagerly. Until one day we had a reliever. And the next day? And the day after that. Until one day we had a reliever. And the next day. And the day after that. The reliever became our new permanent teacher for the remaining 2 months or so of the year. There was never any explanation as to why, and rumors began to spread, and I eventually learned the proper truth. The copy of her immigration documents on that pen drive were the master copy. She had no backups, hard copies, or duplicate. New Zealand's immigration system is ridiculously pedantic in that you need to resubmit all of the evidence from previous visas you've been granted again when you apply for the new one. She no longer had any of it. She was missing crucial documentation to retain her visa status, and as such, her visa was declined and she left or was removed from the country. I had no reason to suspect she wouldn't have backups. Usually you'd use pen drive as a backup and have a master copy on a computer somewhere. This was in the days before cloud storage was a thing, and pen drives were quite small in capacity and not particularly reliable at that. I remember having a few die on me during those years. Besides, what if you lost it? Anybody could poke through your crucial documents. It just seems so unlikely that this would have been the case, and it's what I had assumed when I tossed the thing. But I was wrong, and she was never seen again. And that's the story of how I accidentally and coincidentally got one of the worst teachers ever, not only out of my school, but removed from my entire country. Remember, kids, always, always, always have a backup. So this one's got me in mixed emotions. On one hand, you have a terrible teacher who has a terrible attitude and just a bad person overall. On the other hand, she's still a person, and that paperwork was so important to her, and it was just gone in an instant. But in order to learn, one must make a mistake. So it shocks me to read that an individual had such important documents on a little teeny thumb drive and nothing else. Even if it did take place 10 years ago, you still back your stuff up on a computer. I know when I was in college, I had stuff backed up on an external hard drive, 2 flash drives, my computer at home, my laptop, and my private folder at school. I always had things backed up ridiculously for these reasons. You don't want to rely on such a teeny tiny thing to hold such a very important thing, especially when it means your ability to work in a country. You did it dumb. But this is where I get that mixed emotion. I kind of feel for her on that particular scenario where she lost everything and she had to get sent back to her country. And yet if she made herself more of a likable person, this probably could have been all avoided. I guess the best way to say is, yes, I understand you're a teacher, you're in charge, and everything that happens in the classroom happens under your tutelage and under your supervision. But don't let that power get to your head. In this particular scenario, unfortunately, you were just in the wrong class at the wrong time with the wrong people around you. This guy did do a bad thing by taking the drive, but at the same rate, what would have stopped anybody else from doing it? So I want to know what your guys' personal opinion about this one story is. Yes, it was only one story today. I know, crazy, but it was a long one. And I wanted to share this with you. So tell me in the comments section below, what's your opinion on this story? Where do you stand on a morality issue that this story would bring up? Tell me in the comments section. I always look forward to reading them. Also, if you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and ring that little bell icon. It does really cool things, I promise you. And I thank you very much for watching, and I apologize for taking so long. And as usual and always, my friends, stay frosty and keep moving forward. Oh, it's doing a thing. Okay, fuck.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road. Time grabs you by the wrist and directs you where to go. So make the best of this destined